Welcome, everybody. This is Pastor Bob, and it's time for our midweek message. Now, before Advent, we were getting into some of the more difficult passages in Scripture. And now that the holiday season is over, and by the way, I hope you had a wonderful holiday and a Happy New Year, and I hope that you make this your best year ever. But that being said, we're going to get back into some of the more difficult passages. And the reason I do this is because a lot of us grew up thinking that the Bible was filled with memory verses, one-liners, and easy answers. But actually, the book that we call the Bible, especially for Protestants, the 66 books of the Protestant Bible, it is a very complex book. It's filled with different types of literature, different authors, different audiences, and a very different context to today. So to understand it and to grow in the message God is trying to teach us from it requires a lot of nuance. It requires thought. It requires study, and it requires a level of depth that maybe you wouldn't need to understand, let's say, a popular fiction book you might read today. It's a book, I think, that we can disagree on what it says. I don't think the priority here in reading Scripture is about being right. It's about loving one another. And Christians have debated Scripture for 2,000 years. There have been proud traditions within Judaism and Christianity where they would have debates and structured debates and discussion. And the understanding has always been that this is a book we wrestle with. This is a book that we grow into. It's one that we are always learning and challenging one another and learning from each other. And so the reason I say that is because sometimes when you go through the more difficult passages, the ones that make you take a step back and say, whoa, wait a second here. I need to go a little deeper to understand the message behind this passage. Sometimes when we do that, we come out with a much deeper understanding. And through some of these passages, we'll see some running themes, very important points God is trying to make in the text uh, that we would miss if we glossed over or just put aside some of the verses that challenge us. So let me give you an example. We'll go through 3 of these today, and we'll wrestle with these. And these are definitely ones that will make you, whoa, what the heck was that? These are definitely ones that will stir you up, but we'll kind of get behind these passages and see what the message is there. So the first one I'm going to go with is Luke 14:26. It says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate their father and their mother, their wife and their children, their brothers and sister, yes, even their own life, they cannot be my disciple. Wow. Okay. I mean, the whole point of Christians is to be a Christian is to not just be a believer, to not just be a follower, but to be a disciple. Jesus wasn't here to make converts. He was here to make disciples. Yet, oh my gosh, I have to hate all of these people. Let's move to the next one. This is Matthew 26:11. Before we get into it all, little background. This is near the end of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Jesus is preparing for his burial. He's in a room with the disciples and Mary and Martha, and he's being anointed with a very expensive jar of perfume. And one of the disciples comes up to him and says, wait a second, that's a very expensive jar of perfume. We could take this jar, sell it, and feed the poor. What are we doing here? And Jesus says to him, the poor you will always have with you. You will not always have me. Ooh, that one throws you for a loop at first. And Jesus was certainly true. The poor we've always had. Here we are in America today, richest country in the world. We still have poor. There is some discussion as what poor means in America versus relative to other countries. That's a conversation for another day. But we definitely have the poor. Or let's look at Matthew 8:22. There's this gentleman who wants to follow Jesus. They're kind of walking along, I imagine, and he says, but Jesus, I want to follow you, but I need to go back and bury my father. And Jesus turns to him and says, wait a second, let the dead bury the dead. You come follow me. So all 3 of these really throw us for a loop. But if you look behind them, you start seeing a message that you find all throughout the Bible, and it's this: a gospel priority, a priority to redeem the world and to build the kingdom. And when I say gospel, again, that's the life, death, teaching, everything of Jesus. It's not just say a sinner's prayer and you're saved, which some people have dumbed it down to. By the way, the sinner's prayer is nowhere in the Bible, but it's the whole package. It's making disciples, fully living into the gospel, and thus building the kingdom, which today we call the church. The Bible calls it the church, and to help redeem nothing less than the world. And that is the priority that you find in the Old Testament. The whole Old Testament points to the Messiah who will come to redeem the world and establish a new kingdom in the line of David under the priesthood of Melchizedek, one that will redeem all of humanity, take it in a whole new direction. So the whole Old Testament points to it. Now Jesus is here. He has his death, resurrection, and the whole New Testament is building that kingdom and proclaiming the gospel. You see it all throughout. Now, some churches today in particular have moved away from the gospel and kingdom building priority. Some have gotten into, we're all about caring, which there's nothing wrong with that. But if that's all you do, what's the difference between you and any other caring institution? Some have become all about whatever the latest social issue is. And you couldn't tell the difference between them and a secular organization with the same goals, other than occasionally they say Jesus. Some churches have gotten into all kinds of things. Some have lost the gospel priority altogether and are just sitting there asking, why are we here? There's a famous preacher out of Chicago, and he often draws from the business world. And he said, there's two things that we can draw from the business world into the church today. And it's these two things every church needs to ask. What is our business, and how's business going? What is our business? To proclaim the gospel and to build the kingdom. How is business? Well, in America, not so great. There are some churches doing really well. There are most churches which are declining. But we've gotten away from the reason we're here. Our whole reason for being in business. I hate to equate church with a business, because they're two whole separate things. But it's a question that we need to ask. What is our business, and how's business? And the reality is, and I know some people get really nervous when you start talking about gospel prior to building a kingdom, because all of us have been exposed to more fanatical fringes of religions, in particular, let's say Christianity, where they think that means beating people over the head or even being forceful or irritating at minimum in order to get people into the kingdom and saving them and stuff. And I get it. Every religion has fanatics. Look at Islam. Islam's got moderates, it's got progressives, it's got fanatics. Judaism, same thing. You got the progressives, you got moderate. Every religion winds up breaking into at least three branches. That's just people. Religion, remember, is not God. It's humans' response to God. And so what happens when humans get a control of it, and it doesn't matter if it's organized or not, it usually goes up one way or another. Matter of fact, you even look at Jesus's 12 apostles. Among that group, he had a zealot. He had some fanatics in that group, and then he had some more, tax collectors and more moderates, anyway, these were people engaged more in the world. So even among the 12, you had a variety of people. But the reality is, you can have a gospel priority and have a good preaching and teaching ministry and help people become disciples and emphasize the building of the kingdom without going crazy and being a fanatic. Through my own ministry, I've told this my whole life, you can be a normal person, love Jesus, struggle with sin, have trouble, have the ups and downs of life, and still be a good Christian and still have a gospel priority. I love it. Paul says in one passage, I'm the biggest sinner of them all. And then in another passage, he says, he's wrestling with his own sin, saying, why is it I keep doing the bad things I don't want to do, but the good things I know I ought to be doing, I'm not doing it. And it's the story of all of us. You can still be a normal person struggling with life, having trouble, and still be a normal church and have a gospel priority, meaning the things you do are focused around preaching, teaching, and discipleship, and proclaiming the gospel and building the kingdom. without going fanatic, without harming people, without pushing marginalized groups to the side, without jumping on some bandwagon and waving your banner. You can be a gospel loving church, and people don't even like it when I say the word gospel because it's got a negative connotation with it. When I'm just saying the gospel, it just means the good news of Jesus Christ, the evangelion. Um, you can have the biblical priority. Let's use that term without being fanatic. I'm not a fanatic, and I wouldn't expect anybody I know to be fanatical. Matter of fact, I have a few fanatical friends. I have to kind of keep at arm's length because they drive me crazy. And so, anyway, let me just clarify that because I know that makes everyone nervous because we're Methodist, we're via media. You usually don't find a lot of fanatics within Methodism. And nothing wrong with fanatics. I don't mean talking about fanatics on the right or fanatics on the left. I'm just saying that you can be a kingdom priority church and a kingdom priority believer and a disciple that takes your faith very seriously and still be a normal person and go to the movies and watch television and go to work and raise your family and take your kids to sports games. It doesn't mean you wall off the world around you and build a compound and only watch Christian television and Christian movies and Christian music. You can be a normal Christian and still have a gospel priority and love Jesus and really want to see the kingdom built. And churches can be that way too. And that's my whole point here is what Jesus is trying to do. And he's using hyperbole. He's using strong language to make a point, kind of like where I say, I'm so hungry I could eat a house. Obviously, I can't eat a house, nor would I want to, but I made a point there by using overly strong language. And that's what Jesus is doing. Jesus uses hyperbole a lot. Of course, he doesn't want you to hate your mothers and sisters and aunts and cousins. And of course, he doesn't want the poor to suffer. Matter of fact, Matthew 25 reminds us that we are to be feeding the poor and clothing the naked. But he's saying that you can't do those things without a gospel, kingdom building, biblical priority of redeeming the world, which is God's whole plan for the world, at the forefront of all that we do. And so I think the reason this is relevant is two things. One, churches have lost their gospel priority or their kingdom priority. A lot of churches are become clubs and they're sitting there going, well, why are we even here? What's the difference between us and another club or another organization? And some churches have gone different directions, but you can be a kingdom minded church and still love people, love neighbors, and care for people. You don't have to hate your aunt or cousin. The second part of this is as a believer, having a commitment to becoming a disciple, meaning your priority is following Jesus, studying Jesus, incorporating his teachings into your life, deepening your spiritual life, your prayer life, growing closer to God. You can still have a kingdom priority, a discipleship priority in your own personal spiritual life. Go to church, feed the poor, get involved, without becoming a fanatic or crazy or anything like that. You can still be a normal person, have a very deep, powerful spiritual life. Matter of fact, some of the most deep Christians I have ever met that I look up to were just normal everyday folk, but in their words, in their action, in their deeds, and how seriously they took their faith, and just radiated the love of Christ. And they didn't need to shove it down anyone's throat. They didn't need to beat anyone over the head with it. They didn't need to display it on a T-shirt or virtue signal with a bumper sticker on a car or pretend to be better than someone else because of whatever reason. But you knew it because they just looked a lot like Jesus in their thoughts and their deeds and their action. And the reason, the whole point of this, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this on Sunday, is churches do a lot of things. Churches have gotten into the business of many things in the world today, and I can give you an example, but it's quite an exhaustive list. And I think the church needs to get back to staying in its own lane, which is building the kingdom, making disciples, and trying to redeem and transform the world. That's the gospel priority. Matter of fact, you see it all through the epistles. Paul goes in, starts a church, trains leaders, builds them up, moves on, does it next. I mean, you see it. And maybe we'll go over a couple of Paul's passages next week along this same theme, because some of his will really throw you for a loop. Makes Jesus look rather tame. But we'll continue on this next week. But my point is the church, I think, needs to get back to that disciple and kingdom building priority that Jesus has so clearly illustrated, even using very forthright language and hyperbole to make this point. The church has got to get back to making disciples, building the kingdom, and proclaiming the gospel. And when churches, I think, take that seriously, and there's a world out there hungry for it, they're tired of relativism. They're tired of the 9-to-5 grind. They're asking, what's more out there? Well, Jesus offers it. And so here we go. That's my thoughts for the week. All right. Thank you.